Proverbs chapter 19, verse 18. Again, chasten your son while there is hope, and do not set your heart on his destruction. There are some things in life that not only have to be done, but need a sense of urgency. And the urgency depends upon the circumstance and the problem. Here, of course, the challenge is chastening the son, chastening those who are young. And Solomon's admonition is a reference to the time of life. Do so in the days of their youth, especially. Chasten them while there is hope, because the day is going to come when that child will be as much as an adult as you, will make his or her own decisions, and they either will then have the challenge of walking through a minefield because of the difficulties in their life, because they were not chastened and taught in their youth. And God is powerful enough to overcome the worst of parent, whatever that scale is. There's a lot of wrong ways to lead children, and God can lead those who would look for Him through that minefield, through a variety of difficulties. But as parents, we're gathered here, as Christians, we're here to understand to express our desire to help others as much as possible. And so here Solomon seeks to help those who are parents with this admonition: while there is hope, teach your children. Here we'll talk about the specific chastening and later in the lesson, but here, beginning a little more broadly, while there is hope, and I didn't change the chart, so ignore that part, should be teach your children. Teaching is an ongoing process. We're all evidence of that. Turn to Proverbs chapter 1. But the time of youth, there's something unique about the training and the teaching and the learning that goes on in the days of the youth of our children. Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 8, it's written to a son, but what it implies is equally instruction especially to parents, and then even from that some other applications. But he says, "My son, hear the instruction of your father, and do not forsake the law of your mother." So a child can only know, especially in their youth, the things that are taught. And later they'll grow and observe, and they'll hear other people, they'll observe things, and they'll self-reflect and think about what they see and hear. But there's a time of life where they're not there yet. What they know is what they're taught and what they're shown. And so Proverbs, Solomon here tells us to teach them. Give them a law. Give them a law. And think about how many things they're learning about law, instructions, in the days of their youth. When fathers and mothers are teaching them, they're learning that law has a source. Law can't come out of nowhere. It has to have someone. And so children in their youth learn that my law is not myself. My law comes from someone else. They define the boundaries. They learn that from their youth. They learn about law, that it applies to them when they like it and when they don't like it, when they agree with it and when they don't agree with it. The law doesn't change according to their desires. In their youth, they learn the consequences of disobedience. Maybe we quickly think of that. But also the consequences of obedience. They learn that. And then they learn, well, how do I respond when I obey and I learn the consequences? Well, then what do I do? And then when I disobey and I learn the consequences, then how do I respond to that? All of that goes through both consciously and unconsciously through the mind of children in the days of their youth. And so children need a law. They need instruction from a father, and they need the same instruction from a mother. And even when the parents won't say it in the same words, but when they hear the same kind of instruction, the same consistent instruction from a father, and then they hear it from a mother, they need instruction from both, don't they? And they learn in different ways from both. And so children need a law. Secondly, in Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 4, maybe the most direct or among the most direct passages in the New Testament, directed towards parents, beginning with fathers. And you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath, but bring them up in the training and admonition of the Lord. The word here, bring them up, is actually, I'm not a scholar, so I don't always know why there's sometimes a different wording when originally it was the same word. Back in chapter 5 and verse 29, where he describes nourishing. We all understand the idea of nourish. That's the same word in 6:4, that children need to be brought up. They need to be nourished. In other words, you give them what they need to grow. That's what nourishment does. So nourish them in the training of the Lord. Nourish them in the training of the Lord. So as parents, we realize our children are learning a lesson that their authority comes from someone outside of them. And then eventually they'll realize that parents also have an authority outside of them. There's someone who is over parents. And so that's where as parents we begin. Not first with, well, how did my parents do it? What did my parents say? That's the wrong place to begin as parents. We go back, we might learn some wisdom, sometimes some how-tos and sometimes how not-tos from our parents. But that's not the starting place. The starting place is bring them up, nourish them in the training of the Lord, and then bring them up in the admonition of the Lord. To admonish is just to put the spotlight on something, to call their attention to something. And so call your children's attention to the Lord, to the things that God has called attention to. And the book of Proverbs, it's not titled as a parenting manual because it's not exclusively for that, unless we considered it's God parenting us, and then also how we would our children. But the book of Proverbs provides numerous admonitions of the Lord that we all need, but that children need to hear. They need to hear the words. Proverbs 29, verse 22, as many proverbs do, contrast the temper versus the angry spirit versus the calm spirit. Proverbs 6 and verse 6, as many proverbs do, emphasizes work versus those who refuse to work, laziness. Proverbs 15:26 emphasizes pure thoughts and pure words. And all proverbs and all times are needed, but we live in a lewd, lustful, lascivious, sensual, whatever your translation is in different verses that relate to that. Our society is saturated with sexuality and their dress and entertainment and words and jokes and the humor of the shows and of commentators and radio. It's everywhere. We have to set the baseline in our homes in all of these areas, and it begins with the language of the Proverbs of pure thoughts and words. Even though the book of Proverbs doesn't go into detail about worship, even the concept of true worship and false worship is found there, such as Proverbs 15 and verse 8. So I just mention those passages without turning to them, just to give an overview of the wide variety of admonitions that we have from the Lord in the book of Proverbs, useful for every adult, but it provides some simple starters in admonishing our children. All children need that attention and guidance that comes from admonition and training. Children need punishment. That was really what Solomon was emphasizing there in Proverbs 19, verse 18. That word chastise literally would involve a physical blow, but it can also be figurative, of course. So words can chastise as well as the switch. Do so, he says, while there is hope, which is, again, emphasizing there's a timeline. And at one point in that timeline, some forms of chastising are more effective than they are at other times. And, well, did God give us the time that, well, when do I need to use more words, and when do I need to do more physical, actual spanking? And then what age does that transition the other direction? God didn't give us the age. He didn't teach us in that way. But before children can understand words, then they learn better from the physical chastisement, from a parent who's in control of their own temper. That teaches them what words can't yet communicate. We give them the words, they're learning the words, but that communicates something the words can't yet. And then, of course, as children grow and as they mature, they still need chastening, and the ways and the methods vary according to the individual, the parent, and the child. So there's not always a matter of how to do it, but that it has to be done. Punishment in some form has to be done while there is hope. And then one more, turn to Psalm 119. Psalm 119. As we're already noticing, the majority of these principles and applications apply to us in our maturity as well. And so because we're all in the process of learning, but here the young are again pointed out. How can a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed according to your word. I want to think for a few minutes about that word heed. Another word we don't typically use regularly in conversational English today. And the first thought that comes to mind with heed is just listening, but it's not just listening so that the sounds go in my ear, it's keeping it and practicing it. That's why I have these 3 verses in Genesis, because here are 3 other occasions where that word heed also appears, but when we read it here, we get the idea it's much more than just listening. Because when Adam was put into the garden, he was told to keep the garden. So what did heed involve in keeping the garden? It didn't just mean heed the instructions that he was given, but then there were some specific tasks. We don't know all of what they were, but there were some specific tasks that Adam was given in if he was going to heed the Lord, if he was going to keep the garden. After sin, when Adam and Eve were sent away, there was the cherubim and the flaming sword that was there, and the same word that was given to Adam, that he was to keep the garden. Well, now, outside of the garden, that flaming sword and the cherubim was there to keep the garden as well. Well, keeping the garden in the same way Adam did? No, they had a very different job. But it's the same word, keeping it. And then in chapter 4, verse 9, remember Cain's question, am I my brother's keeper? Adam was to keep the garden. That involves certain things. The cherubim was to keep the garden. That involves something different. Of course, yes, Cain, you are your brother's keeper. That involved a different set of instructions. And so likewise, children have to learn a whole set of instructions for a whole variety of tasks. And it's constantly changing as their abilities change and the needs of the family change. Constantly they're learning what it means and how to do it. So how can a young man cleanse his way? By taking heed, by listening, by keeping the words that are from their parents. But then ultimately the children have to learn that those words come from God. Teach them how to heed while there is hope. From 5 to 25 to 55, parents can tell their children certain words, but it's more effective in the time of their youth. At least that's the beginning of it, isn't it? As a church, we can help to teach children. The New Testament says there are teachers among the church. And so, well, who can they teach? Only someone 18 and up? The Bible doesn't put any kind of age limitations or restrictions on teachers. So certainly the church can work together and teach, but to use kind of our common language, your children need to be homeschooled in spiritual things. Their first teachers need to be father and mother. As a church, we can help and assist in some ways, but my children and your children are not going to learn the things they need to know first and most if first and most their Bible study is twice a week downstairs here. That's not going to be effective. It's going to be a good aid, but that's not the primary source for learning. It has to be from fathers and mothers. While there is hope, teach. But then that raises the question, well, why might hope be lost? And go back to the Old Testament, because I want, for the next 4 points that are the same as we've looked at the other lessons, I want to look at David's family, because hope was lost for many of his children. Why might hope be lost? 1 Kings 1 verse 6, because there are some opportunities to teach that can never be regained, some opportunities that will never return. 1 Kings chapter 1, Adonijah, one of David's sons, as David is soon going to die, and Solomon is going to eventually be named as king. Well, Adonijah had his eyes set on the throne, and so he had a plan expressed in verse 5. But notice in verse 6, it said his father, that's David, had not rebuked him at any time by saying, "Why have you done so?" He was also very good looking. His mother had borne him after Absalom. And so eventually, I believe that Adonijah had to be killed because of his rebellion. What would David do differently if he could go back? David sat in the seat that many parents do, I suppose, reflecting back, what did I do? What did I not do? And I don't know exactly when this was recorded, but what David, if he could do an honest reassessment, he could find is, well, sometimes maybe it wasn't what the problem is what I didn't say, what I didn't do. And at this point, it was too late for him to tell Adonijah as an adult the things that he could have told him earlier. The hope was lost. And so as parents, this is one of the great challenges, is that every phase of life, my children need to hear something and learn something, because that's a layer. God is the foundation, but then there are layers that are added as they learn and as they grow. And if they've passed one phase and there was some lesson that they didn't learn, well, then it doesn't mean it's too late and all is lost, but it's more difficult to learn at the next phase if other foundational things were not there. Learn from David that family problems get worse if we do nothing. Too many times we're going to see David did nothing. And so he failed his children in many ways in their childhood and adulthood, often by what he did not do. Is there one of the gray songbooks here, isn't it? I should have had you do this earlier. We're not going to sing this song tonight. Turn in your gray songbook, though. I'm going to read a few different verses. Song number 550. Song number 550. I'm just going to read verse 1. Think about the fact that there are some opportunities as parents that we have that will never return. Doesn't mean we have to be perfect every single day. We've got to have the right phrase and words to say. It's a learning process for certain. But this is what we have to keep in our minds. There are some opportunities that never return. Read with me just the first verse. Little children from above, send to us with joy and love, bring a hope so clear and bright. Father, help us raise them right. Set that aside. We need help raising them right by teaching them in their youth. Okay, set that aside, but we'll come back to that song in a few minutes. Why might hope be lost? Because our children can be persuaded by others. Turn to 2 Samuel. David faced this as a parent. 2 Samuel chapter 13. 2 Samuel 13, verses 1 through 3. This doesn't tell the whole story, but enough sufficient for this point. Remember that this is following David's sin with Bathsheba and the warning from Nathan the prophet that the sword will not depart from your house. So after this, Absalom, the son of David, had a lovely sister whose name was Tamar. And Amnon, the son of David, loved her. Amnon was so distressed over his sister, Tamar, it would be a half-sister, that he became sick, for she was a virgin, and it was improper for Amnon to do anything to her. But Amnon had a friend whose name was Jonadab, the son of Shimeah, David's brother. Now Jonadab was a very crafty man, and then the details of that are filled in if you continue reading. David, of course, repented of his sin back in chapters 11 and 12. And here, Amnon has a similar weakness to his father. Amnon's sin that he would later commit, raping his half-sister, wasn't precisely what his father David did, but similar in the lack of self-control in that area. But notice what is added to the problem that compounded the problem with Amnon. Was that he had a friend. He had a crafty friend who provided the wrong kind of influence. And so David certainly would have said the right things, but to some degree David's influence in righteousness was diminished by his own example. But David's influence was also diminished because of this crafty friend. And so why could hope be lost? Because our children are going to be influenced by others outside their mother and father, and even outside of the influence of people that maybe we would hope that influence is going to be present. And so they need to be warned ahead of time, warned that others will try to persuade them, and they have to learn how to teach themselves and how to identify what they need to watch out for. Proverbs chapter 1, beginning in verse 10, is a parent doing exactly that. My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent. And then he goes on to give some illustrations and other things, how he describes that warning. And again, this is why the book of Proverbs, among other things, is a parenting book. Parents have the self-made opportunity here. We're going to read the Bible together as a family. 7 days a week, 6 days a week, 5 days a week, 4 days a week. I don't know what the number is. You set it in your home. But sometime on a regular basis, eventually you'll read Proverbs, and then here's a ready-made opportunity to teach and admonish your children. There are other influences, and you do all within God's provision to persuade them, knowing that others will seek to persuade them. Remember Joshua's words, as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. He couldn't make every decision for all of his family, but his emphasis was, if you're in my home, then these are the kinds of decisions that we're going to make. We're going to serve the Lord. Hebrews chapter 12, verses 7 and 8. The kind of leadership that God has for us is what he expects of us as parents in our home. In Hebrews chapter 12, verses 7 and 8, if you endure chastening, God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom a father does not chasten? If you are without chastening, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate and not sons. And so the approach to parenting that, we just let our children learn by their own mistakes, and so we're not going to forbid them from doing something. They'll figure it out. That's not Joshua's approach. That's not God's approach toward us. Warn them. Back to that song, number 550. The second verse. Oh, how tender is the sight. Little ones in bed at night, parents praying at their feet. Father, keep them pure and sweet. Because there's a time where, as a parent, you can pretty much insulate them from much outside influence, but that's only a limited amount of time. Other influences are coming, and depending on different decisions that we make, they're already present. And so while there is hope, let's teach our children before they are persuaded otherwise. Teach them so that they'll be fully persuaded. This isn't pleasant to think about, but our children can develop a heart that is hardened. Turn to 2 Samuel chapter 15. David learned this lesson as well. 2 Samuel chapter 15. Maybe you remember David's son Absalom. So won't go back and read all of the background and the detail. His name was introduced as we read in chapter 13. And so David had that heartache, the heartache with Adonijah, and then with Amnon. And now in 2 Samuel chapter 15, verses 8 through 10, Absalom is speaking here and says, "Your servant took a vow while I dwelt at Geshur in Syria, saying, 'If the Lord indeed brings me back to Jerusalem, then I will serve the Lord.' And the king said to him, 'Go in peace.' So he arose and went to Hebron. Then Absalom sent spies throughout all the tribes of Israel, saying, 'As you hear the sound of the trumpet, then you shall say, Absalom reigns in Hebron.'" And it got worse from there, of course. So why is it that Absalom didn't respond to David the way that David responded to Saul? Remember, David wouldn't lay a hand. He even felt guilty when he cut a part of Saul's robe or skirt off. He said, because this is the Lord's anointed. Absalom didn't have any such conscience or boundary against rebelling against his own father. The fact that his father was the Lord's anointed meant nothing to him. And what could David do about that now at this point? Absalom had heard enough that he knew the right things to say. He says, "Oh, I made this vow that then I'll serve the Lord if the Lord lets me come back." Yet in his heart to say that, to lie and to include the Lord in that, it was nothing to Absalom. And at this point, there was nothing that David could do to persuade him. And Absalom, of course, ended up losing his life. Contrary to the teaching that's common today, children are not born sinners. Children are not born with hardened hearts. Children are born with innocent hearts that don't know left from right or right from wrong. That has to be taught. And so Jesus taught several times when he used the example of children. He said that you must become as a little child. Luke 18, verse 17, being one such example. And so every heart is born with this interest to learn and to follow. And so that learning is important, and who they follow matters. And as they grow, Proverbs chapter 1 and verse 7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Proverbs chapter 9, verse 10, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom and knowledge. Will they seek it? Well, as parents, you don't have any control over whether their heart craves for and seeks for and is interested in and is curious about the wisdom and the knowledge that God makes available. They may hear it and have no interest. Look at Ephesians chapter 4. You can't control their response to it. But what you can control in the days of their youth is that they have something to respond to. Ephesians chapter 4 describes Paul is summarizing the hardened heart of the Gentiles. And of course, on other occasions, he talks about the hardened heart of the Jews. The Jews knew more than the Gentiles, but they didn't make much use of it as a whole. But in Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 18, speaking of these whose understanding is darkened, being alienated from the life of God, why does that happen? Because of the ignorance that is in them, because of the blindness of their hearts. And so teach them while there is hope. Teach them so that if their heart is hardened, it's because they're responding against what they know, as opposed to them having nothing that they know to respond to. Not pleasant to think about my children, or for you to think about your children having a hard heart, but it's possible. Back to the song, number 550, the third verse. Little children soon are grown. Can they face the world alone? As they strive and struggle through, Father, let them turn to you. And so teach them while there is hope. Why might opportunities to teach our children be lost? Well, David realized, David knew that it's appointed unto man once to die, and after this the judgment. In 2 Samuel chapter 18, David, on this and several occasions, he saw the death of several of his own children. Absalom, and I believe Adonijah as well. And so David needed to do what parents have the responsibility to do, because I don't want to think about being at my children's own funeral, but we all know people who have. And so teach your children while they have life, because we have no promise of their lifespan. And then in 1 Kings chapter 2, as David foresees his own funeral, his own death, I suppose there could be a whole other book about the thoughts of David about his family on his deathbed. And what could he say? What could he do? What could he change at that point? Little or nothing. He could only change what he might say. But the time came when David could do nothing, could say nothing to his own children. And so David is an illustration and a reminder to teach our children before their death or before our death, because they both are coming. If your children died today, could you have confidence they would go and be with the Lord? Teach them while there is such hope. If you died today, parents, if you died today, what would your children talk about? Or maybe they wouldn't talk about it, but think about. What is it that you'll leave? You may leave an inheritance or a home, other sentimental objects. But what will you leave in their hearts? What they do with it, you can't control. That they have something to think about, you can. Plant those and water those while there is hope. The fourth verse is painful for parents to read or to sing. When our time to go draws near, we may leave our children here. You can read it if I can't. To the new land far away, Father, bring them home someday. We call them children, but they're not children forever. What can we do? The older you get, the older your children get, you realize the less that you have in your own control, but it focuses our mind and our attention on what we can. So that's my purpose of this lesson tonight, a reminder for ourselves and for each one of us. While there's hope, while there is opportunity, while we have life and our children have life, while there is hope, let us do the best of our ability and continue to learn together and help each other and teach our children. Turn to number 332. We sang a few minutes ago of our willingness to give our life to God. This song reminds us of, or challenges us. Am I willing to give all? Am I willing to surrender all? And that begins in my heart, and my soul, and my mind, and my strength. And if in your heart and soul and mind and with your strength you know that there's sin, then that's your greatest problem. And Jesus came to provide a solution to your greatest problem. If you know that you need the forgiveness of the God of the heavens and the earth, then confess your faith that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and be baptized into Christ, and He will keep His promise. If you need to turn back to Him as a Christian, if you once surrendered all and then took some of that back, and we urge you to return to Him in your heart and soul and mind. And if that needs to be done so publicly, if our prayers will help you in turning back, if we can encourage you in any way, tell us how as we stand and sing.